Namaste and welcome to my YouTube channel. This video is about the theory of language learning on Behaviorism vs Mentalism. This video will be helpful for those who are preparing for TSC examination second paper of English. This video includes the introduction of Behaviorism and Mentalism in language learning, core concepts language learning process in these theories, key principles, beliefs of both theories, implications in language learning, teaching methods in both theories, criticism and conclusion. Introduction to Behaviorism and language learning. Behaviorism is a psychological approach emphasizing observable behaviors. It dominated early 20th century learning theories. Major influencers include Pavlov, Skinner, and Thorndike. Language learning is viewed as habit formation via stimulus response. Let's see introduction habit in more detail. Behaviorism is a psychological theory that focuses on observable behaviors and the environmental stimuli that cause them. When applied to language learning, it posits that language is a learned behavior acquired through interaction with the environment, rather than through innate mechanisms. Emerging in the early 20th century, prominent figures like Ivan Pavlov, John B. Watson, and most notably B.F. Skinner, shaped this school of thought. In the context of language, behaviorism gained significant traction in the mid-20th century, proposing that language acquisition is a process of habit formation through conditioning. Core concepts of behaviorism. Classical conditioning, associating stimuli to evoke responses, exemplified by Pavlov's dogs. Operant conditioning, behavior shaped through reinforcement and punishment, Skinner's box. Stimulus response, behavior triggered by specific stimuli. Imitation and reinforcement, copying and rewarding behaviors solidify learning. The core concepts in detail. The behaviorist theory of language learning is built on a few core concepts. Stimulus response, SR. This is the fundamental unit of behaviorism. A stimulus in the environment elicits a response from the learner. In language learning, a stimulus could be hearing a word or phrase. Imitation. Learners are seen as imitating the language they hear in their environment. Children, for instance, imitate the sounds, words, and sentence structures of adults. Reinforcement. This is a crucial element. When a learner produces a correct linguistic response, e.g., saying a word correctly, they receive positive reinforcement, e.g., praise, a smile, getting what they asked for. This reward strengthens the likelihood of the behavior being repeated. Negative reinforcement involves the removal of an unpleasant stimulus, also increasing the likelihood of the behavior. Conditioning. Through repeated exposure to stimuli and consistent reinforcement for correct responses, learners become conditioned to produce appropriate linguistic behaviors in specific situations. This can be classical conditioning, associating a stimulus with a response, or operant conditioning, learning through the consequences of behavior. Habit formation. Language learning is viewed as the formation of linguistic habits, through repeated stimulus-response connections and reinforcement. Speaking a language fluently is considered a set of well-established habits. The language learning process in behaviorism. Imitation. Learners mimic sounds and speech patterns precisely. Practice. Repetition strengthens associations and builds habits. Reinforcement. Positive feedback encourages correct language use. Error correction. Mistakes are corrected to prevent bad habits. Let's see it in more detail. According to behaviorism, the language learning process unfolds in these stages. Stimulus. The learner is exposed to language in the environment, e.g., hears a word. Imitation. The learner attempts to imitate the sounds or words they hear. Response. The learner produces a linguistic output. Reinforcement. If the output is correct, or a close approximation, the learner receives positive reinforcement. Repetition and habit formation. Through repeated exposure, imitation, and reinforcement, the correct response becomes a habit. Incorrect responses are not reinforced, and gradually diminish. Generalization. Learners may generalize a learned response to similar stimuli, e.g., learning the word cat and then using it to refer to other cats. Discrimination. Learners also learn to discriminate between stimuli and refine their responses to specific contexts. Key principles of behaviorism in language learning. Habit formation. Language is acquired by forming habits. Imitation and repetition, essential for reinforcing correct language behavior. Positive reinforcement. Rewards strengthen desirable responses. Focus on observable behavior. Mental processes are disregarded in favor of behavior. The key principles that underpin the behaviorist theory of language learning. These principles explain how behaviorists believed language is acquired. The primacy of environmental stimuli. Stimulus. A core principle is that language learning begins with exposure to linguistic input from the environment. This input acts as the stimulus. It could be a sound, a word spoken by a parent, a sentence heard on the radio, or a phrase read in a book. The environment is considered the source of the language to be learned. Learning is imitation, response. Behaviorists emphasize that learners imitate the linguistic stimuli they perceive. Children are seen as mimicking the sounds, intonations, words, and grammatical structures they hear from the adults and peers around them. This imitation is the learner's initial response to the environmental stimulus. The power of reinforcement. This is perhaps the most critical principle in shaping behavior, including language. Reinforcement is the consequence that follows a learner's linguistic response. Positive reinforcement, when a learner produces a response that is considered correct or appropriate, e.g., saying milk and getting milk, they receive a rewarding stimulus, the milk, or parental approval, praise. This positive outcome makes the learner more likely to repeat that linguistic behavior in the future. Negative reinforcement. This involves the removal of an unpleasant stimulus when a desired behavior occurs. While perhaps less obvious in basic language learning, it could involve a learner using a correct form to successfully avoid a misunderstanding or a negative reaction. Both positive and negative reinforcement strengthen the connection between the stimulus and the desired response. The role of association and conditioning. Through repeated exposure to stimuli and consistent reinforcement, learners form strong associations between specific situations or objects and the linguistic responses associated with them. This process is known as conditioning. The learner becomes conditioned to produce certain words or phrases automatically when presented with a particular stimulus or in a specific context. This moves beyond simple imitation to a more ingrained response. Language learning as habit formation. The ultimate goal of this conditioning and reinforcement process, according to behaviorism, is the formation of linguistic habits. Speaking a language fluently is viewed as having developed a complex set of these habits. Learners develop automatic responses to various linguistic and situational cues, allowing them to produce language without conscious effort, much like other learned motor skills become habitual. In essence, behaviorists saw language learning as a process of building a repertoire of stimulus-response connections through guided practice and reinforcement. The focus was heavily on the external environment and the observable interactions between the learner and the language input and feedback they received. Beliefs of behaviorism. Language is learned, not innate. Learning arises from environmental interaction. Mind starts as a blank slate. Nurture outweighs nature in learning. Acquisition explained through conditioning. Let's have a look in detail. Behaviorism holds several key beliefs about language learning. Language is learned, not innate. The environment plays a dominant role in language acquisition. Learning occurs through observable behaviors. Mental processes are not necessary to explain language learning. Drilling and repetition are effective learning techniques. Errors are to be avoided and corrected quickly to prevent the formation of bad habits. Implications of behaviorism in language teaching. Drilling. Repetitive exercises build language habits. Positive reinforcement. Rewards encourage learning and effort. Error correction. Preventing mistakes solidifies good usage. Focus on pronunciation. Accuracy in sound and grammar emphasized. Let's see it in detail. The behaviorist theory had significant implications for language teaching methodologies, particularly in the mid-20th century. These include emphasis on drilling and repetition. Audiolingualism, a teaching method heavily influenced by behaviorism, relied heavily on repetitive drills and pattern practice to help learners form correct habits. Focus on observable performance. Assessment often focused on evaluating learners' ability to produce correct responses in controlled situations. Immediate correction of errors. Teachers were encouraged to correct errors immediately to prevent learners from internalizing incorrect forms. Use of positive reinforcement. Teachers were advised to praise and reward students for accurate language production. Structured and controlled practice. Learning activities were often highly structured, guiding learners towards producing specific correct responses. Examples: a baby babbles sounds, and when they produce a sound similar to a word, e.g., ma, their parent smiles and says, mama, reinforcing the sound. A language student in a classroom repeats a phrase after the teacher in a drill. If they say it correctly, the teacher nods approvingly. A learner uses a new vocabulary word correctly in a sentence, and the teacher praises their effort and accuracy. Using flashcards to learn vocabulary, with the correct identification of the word being reinforced. Behaviorist teaching methods. Audiolingual method. Spoken language focus. Emphasis on oral skills and dialogue memorization. Pattern drills. Reinforce grammatical structures through repetition. Immediate feedback. Errors corrected instantly to avoid bad habits. Limited meaning focus. Less attention on communicative intent or comprehension. Drawing directly from behaviorist principles. Teaching methods often emphasize controlled practice and reinforcement to build correct language habits. The most prominent example is the audiolingual method, In classrooms, you would typically see repetitive drills. Students repeat phrases and sentences after the teacher, or audio recordings to memorize patterns and intonation. Pattern practice. Learners practice grammatical structures by substituting elements in a sentence pattern, e.g., I am going to the store, I am going to the bank, I am going to the park. Dialogue memorization. Students memorize short dialogues that model everyday conversations. Immediate error correction. Teachers correct errors quickly and directly to prevent learners from practicing incorrect forms. Positive reinforcement. Students are praised or given positive feedback for accurate responses. Focus on oral language. Initially, there is a strong emphasis on listening and speaking before reading and writing. These methods aim to create automatic, habitual responses to linguistic stimuli, mirroring the behaviorist view of language acquisition as a set of learned behaviors shaped by the environment and reinforcement. The teacher acts as a model and the controller of the learning environment, carefully managing the stimuli and reinforcement. Examples of behaviorist language learning: rote vocabulary memorization, grammar exercises with instant feedback, repetitive pronunciation drills, pattern substitution drills and dialogues. Benefits of working with a behavioral learning model. Working with a behavioral learning model can have several benefits for educators and students alike. Some of these benefits are: it provides a clear and objective way of measuring and evaluating student performance and progress. It allows teachers to tailor instruction and feedback according to each student's needs and abilities. It helps teachers manage classroom behavior and discipline by using positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement strategies. It motivates students to learn by rewarding them for their achievements and efforts. It helps students develop self-regulation skills by teaching them how to monitor and control their own behavior. Criticisms of behaviorism: neglects creativity, overemphasizes imitation, ignoring original language use, misses complexity, fails to explain complex grammar and syntax, ignores cognition, disregards internal mental understanding and meaning, limited real-world use, less effective for practical communication skills. Despite its influence, behaviorism faced significant criticism regarding its explanation of language learning, the poverty of the stimulus. Critics, notably Noam Chomsky, argued that the language input children receive is often incomplete, ungrammatical, and limited. Yet children are able to produce novel and grammatically correct sentences they have never heard before. Behaviorism struggles to explain this creative aspect of language use. Lack of explanation for abstract concepts. Behaviorism primarily focuses on observable behaviors and struggles to account for the learning of abstract linguistic concepts and the underlying rules of grammar. Overemphasis on imitation. Children don't simply imitate, they actively process language and make generalizations, sometimes leading to virtuous errors, e.g., saying goat instead of went, which are not easily explained by simple imitation and reinforcement. Neglect of mental processes. By focusing solely on observable behavior, behaviorism largely ignores the cognitive processes, understanding, and internal mental representations that are involved in language learning. Not accountable for the rapidity of acquisition, children acquire language at a remarkably fast pace, which critics argue cannot be fully explained by a gradual process of habit formation through conditioning alone. In summary, while behaviorism provided valuable insights into the role of environmental factors in reinforcement and learning, its purely external focus proved insufficient to fully explain the complexities, creativity, and rapid nature of human language acquisition. Subsequent theories emerged to address these limitations by incorporating the cognitive and social aspects of learning. Conclusion: behaviorism's legacy. Behaviorism offered early foundational insights into language learning. It shaped methods like the audio-lingual method. Today's teaching integrates multiple theories for effective learning. Its limitations inspired cognitive and communicative approaches. In conclusion, behaviorism views language learning primarily as the formation of habits through environmental interaction. Key principles like stimulus response, imitation, and reinforcement are central, suggesting learners acquire language by mimicking what they hear and being rewarded for correct linguistic behaviors. This led to teaching methods like audiolingualism, which emphasized repetitive drills and pattern practice to build automatic responses. While behaviorism highlighted the importance of practice and environmental input, it faced significant criticism for largely ignoring the mental processes involved in language and failing to adequately explain the creative and complex nature of language acquisition, including children's ability to produce novel utterances. Despite its limitations as a complete explanation, the principles of practice and reinforcement still influence some language teaching practices today.
Mentalism in language learning, unlocking the mind's potential. This presentation explores mentalism's key role in language learning. We'll cover its core concepts, processes, and teaching implications. Introduction to mentalism. Definition. Language learning involves internal mental processes and cognition. Historical roots. Noam Chomsky opposed behaviorism's focus on external observation. Focus. Humans have innate language abilities and mental frameworks. Let's see in more details. Mentalism in language learning is a theory that emphasizes the role of the mind and innate abilities in acquiring language, standing in contrast to behaviorism's focus on environmental conditioning. Propounded by Noam Chomsky, it suggests humans are born with a specialized capacity for language, often called the language acquisition device, LAD, which contains universal grammatical principles, universal grammar. According to mentalism, children don't simply imitate, they actively process the language they hear, forming and testing hypotheses about its rules. This innate predisposition allows them to acquire complex grammatical structures rapidly and produce novel sentences they've never encountered. The focus is on understanding the underlying mental knowledge, competence, that enables language use, highlighting that language acquisition is a unique cognitive process, not merely a learned behavior. Core concepts of mentalism. Language acquisition device, LAD. A hypothesized brain module enabling language learning. Universal grammar, UG. Set of innate grammatical principles shared across all languages. Competence versus performance. Internal knowledge contrasts with actual language use. Contrast with behaviorism. Rejects imitation and habit as sole learning mechanisms. Let's look at each of these in a bit more detail. Language acquisition device, LAD. This is a hypothetical, innate module or capacity in the human brain that is specifically dedicated to language acquisition. Chomsky proposed the LAD as an explanation for the speed and ease with which children acquire language, despite the limited and often imperfect language input they receive. The LAD is seen as a biological endowment that contains the fundamental principles and parameters that govern the structure of human languages. It's like a pre-wired system that is activated by exposure to language, allowing children to process linguistic data and develop an understanding of the rules of their native language. Universal grammar, UG, housed within the LAD. Universal grammar refers to the set of fundamental linguistic principles and properties that are believed to be common to all human languages. These are the underlying rules and structures that form the basis of every language, even though languages may seem very different on the surface. UG provides a framework or blueprint that guides the child's language development. When a child is exposed to a specific language, the LAD, guided by UG, helps them to figure out the specific rules, parameters, of that particular language from the input they receive. Examples of UG principles might include the idea that all languages have nouns and verbs, or that sentences have a hierarchical structure. 3. Linguistic competence. This refers to the unconscious, underlying knowledge of the language that a native speaker possesses. It's the mental system of rules that allows a speaker to produce and understand an infinite number of grammatical sentences. Mentalism focuses on this internal, mental capacity rather than just observable language use, performance. Linguistic competence includes knowledge of grammar, vocabulary, and phonology. According to Chomsky, this competence is largely a reflection of the innate universal grammar, shaped by the specific language environment. These three concepts are intricately linked within the mentalist framework, explaining how humans are biologically equipped to acquire language and the nature of the knowledge they develop. The language learning process, a mentalistic view. Active grammar construction. Learners build their own grammar rules internally. Hypothesis testing. Learners test and adjust language rules from exposure. Meaningful context. Contextual input enhances language understanding and retention. Error as evidence. Mistakes reveal learners' internal language system. From a mentalist perspective, the language learning process is not simply about imitating and being reinforced, as in behaviorism. Instead, it is viewed as an active, internal, and largely unconscious process driven by the innate language faculty. Here's how it's understood. Exposure to primary linguistic data. The process begins when a child is exposed to language in their environment. This input, which Chomsky called primary linguistic data, is often messy, incomplete, and even contains errors. However, the child's innate LAD is equipped to handle this. Activation of the LAD and universal grammar. Upon exposure to language, the innate language acquisition device, LAD, is activated. The universal grammar, UG, contained within the LAD provides the child with a pre-existing framework of possible linguistic structures and rules common to all languages. Hypothesis testing and rule formation. The child's mind actively processes the linguistic input, not by simply memorizing phrases, but by forming hypotheses about the underlying grammatical rules of the specific language they're hearing. They test these hypotheses as they begin to produce language. For example, a child might form a hypothesis that all past tense verbs end in ed, leading them to say good or eated. Matching input to universal grammar and setting parameters, the child unconsciously attempts to match the language input they receive to the principles of universal grammar. They use the input to set parameters for the specific language they are learning. For instance, UG might contain a principle that specifies where the head of a phrase goes, for example before or after its complement, and the child uses the input to determine the correct setting for that parameter in their language, for example, English's head initial. Development of linguistic competence. Through this process of exposure, hypothesis testing, and parameter setting, the child gradually develops an internal, unconscious understanding of the grammatical rules of their language. This forms their linguistic competence, the ability to produce and understand novel, grammatically correct sentences. Creative production. The development of linguistic competence allows the child to move beyond simply repeating what they have heard. They can generate entirely new sentences and understand utterances they have never encountered before, demonstrating a creative use of language based on their internalized rules. In essence, the mentalist view sees language learning as an innate, cognitive journey where the child actively constructs their knowledge of language based on an inborn blueprint and the linguistic data from their environment. The focus is on the internal mental processes of discovering and applying the rules of grammar. Key principles of mentalism in language learning. Understand underlying rules. Focus on deep linguistic knowledge beyond surface forms. Encourage active exploration. Learners participate actively to discover language systems. Provide rich input. Exposure to diverse, meaningful language material is essential. Facilitate hypothesis testing. Opportunities for feedback help refine understanding. Based on the core concepts and the view of the language learning process, the key principles of mentalism in language learning can be summarized as follows. Innate capacity. The most fundamental principle is that humans are born with an innate biological capacity for language acquisition. This inherent ability is what distinguishes humans from other species in their capacity to learn complex language systems. Universal grammar, UG, a core principle is the existence of universal grammar, an innate system of abstract linguistic principles and parameters that underlies all human languages. This provides a pre-existing framework for language structure in the learner's mind. Language acquisition is rule-governed. Mentalism posits that language learning is not just about memorizing words and phrases, but about discovering and internalizing the rules that govern how language works, syntax, morphology, etc. Creativity and productivity. A key principle is the emphasis on the creative aspect of language. Learners can produce and understand an infinite number of novel sentences, demonstrating that they have acquired a system of rules rather than just a set of memorized responses. Focus on competence over performance. Mentalism prioritizes the study of linguistic competence, the underlying, unconscious knowledge of the language's rules, over observable language performance, which can be influenced by various factors. Language learning is relatively rapid and effortless. For young children, language acquisition is seen as a remarkably fast and largely effortless process, which mentalists argue is due to the triggering of the innate led by environmental input, rather than explicit teaching or extensive conscious effort. These principles highlight the mentalist belief that language acquisition is primarily a function of the human mind's innate structure and its capacity to process and generate language based on an internal grammatical system. Beliefs underpinning mentalism in language learning. Innate capability. Humans are born with language learning potential. Creative process. Language acquisition is governed by creative rules. Role of errors. Mistakes are natural and important for development. Input importance. Stimuli trigger mental mechanisms for learning. The underpinning beliefs of mentalism in language learning are the fundamental assumptions that drive the theory and differentiate it from perspectives like behaviorism. These beliefs include: humans are biologically wired for language. A central belief is that the capacity for a language is not something purely learned from the environment but is an inherent, biological part of being human. The mind is not a blank slate. Contrary to the behaviorist idea of tabula rasa, mentalism believes that the mind is not empty at birth but contains pre-existing structures or predispositions specifically for language. Language is rule-governed. Mentalists believe that language operates based on a complex system of abstract rules, and that the goal of language acquisition is the internalization of these rules. Exposure triggers an internal mechanism, while environmental input is necessary. Its primary role is to activate and trigger the innate language learning mechanisms within the learner's mind. Language is creative and infinite. A core belief is in the generative nature of language, the ability to produce and understand an unlimited number of novel sentences, which stems from an internal rule system rather than a finite set of learned responses. Focus on internal mental states. Mentalism believes that to understand language learning, we must investigate the unobservable mental processes and structures within the mind, not just external behavior. These beliefs emphasize the biological and cognitive foundations of language acquisition, positing that the human brain is uniquely equipped to unravel the complexities of language. Implications of mentalism for language teaching. Develop communicative competence. Teaching focuses on practical language use and understanding. Use authentic materials. Real-world texts and contexts aid learning. Meaning-focused activities. Language used for genuine communication and comprehension. Error correction. Errors guide learning without penalizing learners. The mentalist theory of language learning has significantly impacted how we view language acquisition and has several important implications for language teaching and learning practices. Shift from habit formation to rule formation. Unlike behaviorism's focus on developing habits through repetition, mentalism emphasizes that learners are internalizing a system of rules. This shifted the focus in teaching from endless drills to activities that help learners discover and apply grammatical rules. Importance of comprehensible input. While not a direct tenet of Chomsky's initial theory, subsequent work influenced by mentalism, such as Krashen's input hypothesis, highlighted the importance of providing learners with comprehensible input, language that is understandable but slightly challenging. This input is seen as the data that triggers the LAD and allows learners to set parameters for universal grammar. Focus on meaning and communication. If language is an innate, rule-governed system for expressing thought, then teaching should prioritize conveying and understanding meaning. This led to approaches that emphasize communication and using language in meaningful contexts, rather than just manipulating grammatical structures in isolation. Learner autonomy and creativity. Recognizing the learner's innate capacity and active role in hypothesis testing implies that learners are not just passive recipients. This supports teaching approaches that encourage learner autonomy, allow for creative language use, and view errors as a natural part of the process of testing hypotheses. Understanding of development stages. Mentalism's focus on innate development aligns with the observation that language learners, both first and second language, often go through predictable stages of acquisition. This understanding can inform curriculum design and assessment, helping teachers to anticipate and support learners' progress. Reduced emphasis on explicit grammar teaching. In early stages, for young children learning their first language, mentalism suggests that explicit grammar instruction is not necessary because the LAD guides the process. While explicit teaching is still considered valuable for second language learners, the mentalist perspective suggests that a strong foundation in understanding and using the language is paramount, with explicit grammar serving to refine and monitor output, as in Krashen's monitor hypothesis. Acknowledgement of the black box. Mentalism acknowledges that there are internal cognitive processes in language learning that are not directly observable. This has led to a greater interest in psycholinguistics and researching the mental aspects of language processing. In essence, mentalism moved the field of language learning away from a purely behaviorist, external focus to one that recognizes the complex interplay between innate abilities and environmental input, emphasizing the mental processes involved in acquiring the rule-governed nature of language. Teaching methods based on mentalistic theory. Task-based learning. Learners complete meaningful tasks using the target language. Communicative language teaching. Emphasizes interaction and real communication. Focus on forms. Explicit grammar instruction within meaningful context. Examples. The natural approach. The silent way. While mentalism itself is a theory of language acquisition rather than a prescriptive teaching method, its principles have profoundly influenced various approaches to language teaching, often leading to methods that contrast with the behaviorist approaches. Based on the beliefs and principles of mentalism, several methods are considered to be more aligned with the idea of the learner as an active, rule-governed individual with an innate capacity for language. Here are some language teaching approaches that resonate with mentalist principles. The natural approach, heavily influenced by Krashen's monitor model, which has roots in mentalism. The natural approach emphasizes creating a low-anxiety environment where learners are exposed to comprehensible input in a natural and meaningful way. The focus is on communication and understanding messages, allowing the innate acquisition process to work. Explicit grammar instruction is downplayed in the initial stages, similar to how children acquire their first language. Communicative language teaching, CLT. CLT is a broad approach that prioritizes the development of communicative competence, the ability to use language effectively and appropriately in real-life situations. This aligns with Mentalism's view of language as a tool for communication and its focus on underlying competence. CLT activities often involve pair and group work, role-playing, and task-based learning, encouraging learners to use the language creatively to express meaning. Task-based language teaching, TBLT. TBLT is a type of CLT that structures learning around the completion of meaningful tasks using the target language. This approach encourages learners to activate their internal linguistic knowledge to achieve a goal, promoting the natural use and development of language rules in context. The Silent Way. While seemingly counterintuitive, the Silent Way, developed by Caleb Gatineau, also aligns with Mentalist principles by emphasizing learner discovery rather than rote repetition. Teachers use minimal talk and employ color-coded charts and rods to help learners discover the relationships between sounds and meaning, and the rules of the language, tapping into their innate problem-solving abilities. Community language learning, CLL. This method, influenced by humanistic psychology and somewhat aligned with the Mentalist focus on the learner, creates a supportive community where learners work together to construct conversations in the target language. The teacher acts as a facilitator, helping learners express what they want to say, emphasizing the meaning and communicative intent. These methods, while diverse, share a common thread influenced by Mentalist thought. They move away from the idea of language as merely a set of habits to be drilled and instead focus on the learner's internal capacity, the importance of meaningful input, the development of underlying rules, and the use of language for authentic communication. They aim to create conditions that facilitate the natural processes of language acquisition. Benefits of Mentalism in language teaching. Drawing on the principles and implications of Mentalism, here are 7 potential benefits for language learners when teaching approaches are influenced by this theory. Focus on understanding over memorization. Mentalism emphasizes grasping the underlying rules of language. This encourages learning activities that promote genuine understanding rather than rote memorization of phrases, leading to deeper processing and retention. 3. Development of communicative competence. By prioritizing meaning and communication, Mentalist-informed methods help learners develop the ability to use language effectively in real-life situations, going beyond just grammatical accuracy. Enhanced creativity in language use. Recognizing the innate capacity for language generation, these approaches encourage learners to produce novel sentences and express their own ideas, fostering creativity and fluency. 4. Increased learner autonomy. Methods influenced by Mentalism often empower learners to take a more active role in their learning process, encouraging them to discover rules and practice independently, promoting self-reliance. 5. Reduced anxiety about errors. Viewing errors as a natural part of the hypothesis testing process, rather than simply incorrect habits, can create a more supportive learning environment where learners feel less anxious about making mistakes and are more willing to experiment with the language. 6. Better handling of novel language. By developing an understanding of underlying rules, competence, learners are better equipped to understand and produce language they haven't encountered before, making them more adaptable in different linguistic situations. 7. Potential for more rapid acquisition, especially in early stages. By tapping into the innate language faculty and providing comprehensible input, Mentalist-influenced approaches can potentially facilitate a more natural and faster acquisition process, particularly for foundational language skills. Criticisms and limitations of Mentalism. Empirical challenges. Innate structures like lat and ug are hard to prove. Environmental neglect. Social and learning contexts receive insufficient attention. Individual differences. Ignores variations in learner styles and needs. Abstract focus. Overlooks practical language use and fluency development. While Mentalism offered a compelling alternative to behaviorism and significantly advanced our understanding of language acquisition, it has also faced several criticisms. Vagueness of the lat and ug. Critics argue that concepts like the language acquisition device, LAD, and universal grammar, UG, are abstract and difficult to define precisely or locate in the brain. There is a lack of concrete neurological evidence to directly support the existence of a specific LAD containing universal linguistic principles in the way Chomsky initially proposed. Limited role of the environment in social interaction. A major criticism is that Mentalism, in its strong form, downplays the crucial role of the social environment, interaction, and input in language acquisition. While it acknowledges exposure, it doesn't fully account for how the quality and nature of interaction influence the learning process. Theories like sociocultural theory and interactionism emphasize the social aspects that mentalism may not adequately address. Focus on competence over performance. Critics argue that by prioritizing abstract linguistic competence, mentalism neglects the variability and complexities of actual language use, performance. Factors like social context, pragmatics, and individual differences in language use are not central to the mentalist framework. Difficulty accounting for language variation and change. If universal grammar provides a fixed, innate blueprint, it can be challenging to explain the vast diversity among languages and how languages change over time. Critics argue that a theory emphasizing innate, universal structures may not fully account for this linguistic variation. Challenges in explaining second language acquisition. While mentalism primarily focused on first language acquisition in children, applying its principles to second language learning in adults is more complex. The critical period hypothesis, suggesting a decline in the innate capacity after a certain age, doesn't fully explain why some adults achieve high levels of proficiency or the different pathways learners take in SLA. Property of the stimulus argument is debated. The argument that the language input children receive is too impoverished to fully explain their knowledge has been challenged. Some researchers argue that the input is richer and that general cognitive learning mechanisms, not just a language-specific device, can account for language acquisition. Limited pedagogical, teaching, applications. While mentalism has influenced teaching philosophies, it doesn't directly prescribe specific teaching methods in the way behaviorism did with audiolingualism. This has led some to view it as more of a theory of acquisition than a practical guide for language instruction. These criticisms have led to the development of other theories that attempt to provide a more comprehensive account of language acquisition by incorporating the roles of environment, social interaction, and cognitive processes alongside potential innate predispositions. Conclusion: the enduring of mentalism. Contributions: mentalism advanced understanding of internal language processes. Paradigm shift. Shifted focus from behaviorism to cognitive approaches. Ongoing debate. Continues being integrated with social and interactionist theories. Balanced approach. Effective teaching blends mentalism with practical methods. In conclusion, mentalism offers a beautiful idea about how we learn languages. It's not just about copying and repeating, but about a wonderful gift we are born with. This theory, especially through Chomsky's work, suggests our minds are uniquely built for language, like having a special language helper inside us called the lad, guided by a universal grammar that connects all languages. One, it reminds us that language learning is a creative, almost magical process where we actively figure out the rules of language. While there are debates about how it all works exactly, mentalism highlights the amazing power of the human mind to learn and create with language, showing it's a deeply human and intricate ability that goes far beyond simple learning. Thank you for watching this video. Please, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe my channel. Please, press the bell icon for more informative videos.